Okay, amazing. Okay, I guess we can just jump right into it if you want. Um,
Sure. Is this something, Nina, that you're really interested in? Give me a sense of the class.
sure, absolutely. So the class,
Sure.
it's basically a junior tutorial in the government department at Harvard,
Got it.
and it's really focused on AI, the socio-legal aspect, the policy aspect. Our professor's previous lawyer has a lot of experience in this area. So we've been going through a lot of the legal frameworks and a lot of the policy, um, more so than maybe other traditional aspects of it. So like what are the
Got it.
different theorists saying? And like what is the also more philosophical questions about it. So like what is education, for example, in a digitized world? What does that mean? Um,
Hmm.
so we did a presentation last week, the same style as we're doing this week about AI's effect on education. And so we all target three different parts of these larger questions. So like, what's the meaning of it? What's happening, and what should we do in the future, basically.
Got
So
it.
we're part two for this one coming up about the workplace, um,
Yeah.
which is why you are incredibly qualified to talk about this. And one of your readings about the gig economy was on the reading list, which is how I found you. Um,
Okay. Well, good. That helps me a lot, Nina.
amazing.
So you said, yeah. So you said a list of questions. You know what? I think my earbuds are. Oh, here we go. Yeah, I need transparency mode. There we go. Now I can hear myself. Um, so you said a list of questions, and there are very provocative questions. They're the fundamental questions that we as a society need to ask about work and what technology, platform economy, digitized economy, whatever the term might be, is likely to do to it. Some of this is uncertain. So in terms
Yes.
of AI, there are all kinds of conflicting reports about um, whether it will augment people's skills, whether it will displace people's skills, whether agents will begin to operate in autonomous ways to make people redundant,
Yeah.
or even whether AI will begin to act in ways that are at odds with the needs of its designers. That's called the alignment problem, and
Okay.
it's never been solved. Is how do we ensure that any agents or AI does what we expect it to do rather than what it wants to do? But in terms of the digitized economy, I in my work I've used the term platform economy
Mm.
to refer to the various ways in which digital technology is beginning to be used to govern the performance of work. So, how does it change the work environment? I think it's a great question because it encourages us to delve into the experience, the everyday situations and surroundings and normative environment in which people work. And I think that the first point to take away is that it individualizes the work experience. It does so in ways. I mean, it just kind of the workplace is dissolved in many of the kind of gig or platform economy jobs. People don't have a shared experience of the work, and therefore they feel much more individualized. There's another way in which we can speak about individualized. The nature of the work environment, in that people are increasingly defined as independent contractors, so they're not eligible for different kinds of policies, unemployment insurance or worker compensation if they're injured. So they're on their own. So it's kind of much more of a sort of a Wild West kind of individualized environment where you're just up, you're responsible for whatever happens, and there are very few supports you can count on. No coworkers, no welfare state. Um, Other ways in which the work environment has changed is it's kind of depersonalized in a sense that it used to be the case that you'd interact with the supervisor. And now that's taken out the equation. There's no way you can negotiate with an algorithm. So, and that leads to another change where we're really speaking about the evaluation of work happens in a way that is just an aggregation of whatever the customers or clients, whatever buttons they click. So, there's a kind of a feeling that you're being evaluated in a kind of cold-hearted way. So there's a kind of an absence of the social or relational dynamics that used to uh, uh, exist in a kind of in the conventional economy. So all of those are really remarkable changes, and that's why people, it's kind of a, when people speak in really harsh ways about when your algorithm is a boss, because then there's this notion that there's this unthinking, unfeeling infrastructure that is governing the nature of your work. So I think those are some of the ways in which the digitized economy changes work. One of the As we delve more deeply into the ways in which management and worker relationship has changed, I think it's also important to use the term asymmetric information asymmetry, because what happens, and this is, some legal scholars have played the leading role in this, in analysis of this, is uh, managers have always had the files. They've always had the information. This goes back to Frederick Winslow Taylor and the kind of study of the time and effort that workers needed to perform individual tasks. So, but what happens with the digitized economy is that the accumulation of information, the extraction of data about worker performance is so greatly increased that it gives employers, owners of the platforms, the ability to know what's the minimum amount of pay or compensation that they need to give to workers in order to get them to comply. So by analyzing workers' histories, they can see that, for example, they'll respond to a job that gives them $13.84 as opposed to waiting for like a $16 job. So it gives them the ability to kind of exercise greater control over workers by personalizing the compensation levels. People have referred to this as wage discrimination. It also involves consumers, so that if you're using a Mac computer and you're buying something on Amazon, you'll probably pay a higher price. This is true for airline tickets as well. The seller has information about you and can price things to their own advantage. And that happens with the employment situation. So So what we're really speaking about is how the digitized economy begins really to redistribute control upward in ways that aren't always felt by the worker. But so we're kind of moving out of your first question about the work environment, but nonetheless, there is this kind of vague sense that people they need to be responsive to this system, this infrastructure, or they won't get jobs. So if you're a freelancer, for example, or Upwork, the visibility of your skills and your offer of work depends upon the evaluations that you get. So what's happening is that the allocation of work happens really algorithmically. So your ability to earn income depends upon your compliance with customers and with the platform's terms of service. And that means you're really kind of increasingly at the mercy of an infrastructure that it seems like post-human in many respects. So those are some things I would say in terms of the first question that you posed. I want to say just the second question you ask, you begin to see that many of the scholars that are writing on the platform economy are firmly critical, like adopting a critical perspective. And at some of the more business oriented or elite institutions, there's a kind of an effort to be really even handed. And I sense that in the second question that we have here. How do you see managers and employers shifting to ensure workers still feel their jobs are meaningful? I think that's about as far down on the list of what managers and owners are thinking about as it could be. I do think that there's an effort to kind of dress up the work so that it gives, you see this in the kind of promos that people get. Be your own boss, kind of take control of your working life. That's done in order to motivate people, but it's really done to manipulate people. And there is a gamification that's consciously built into work. And it's really not about meaningful work. It's about compliance. It's about getting workers to comply with the designs of the algorithm. But I think the real question, and this is the one that you've underlined, is the question of the implications of the digitized economy for the future of meaningful work. And from what I've said, you can begin to see that I think first of all, let's say futurology is really, it's how to say it's really more alchemical than scientific. So we really don't know, but we can see certain trends. And uh, maybe one way to put this is that the Harvard Business School has as now an emeritus professor, Shoshana Zuboff. And in the late 1980s, she wrote a very hopeful book that was called In the Age of the Smart Machine. And in that book, she believed that the only really efficient and effective way to use digital technology was to empower frontline workers. And was not necessarily the way that middle managers wanted to use the technology, but that upper corporate layer would realize that this was the only way that the technologies could be used to great advantage. And therefore, meaningful work would be on the horizon because of digitized work. Now, fast forward to 2019, and Zuboff, having observed the ensuing decades, writes a book called In the Age of Surveillance Capitalism. And what she ultimately concluded was that she was really quite wrong to be hopeful that meaningful work would be on the horizon. And instead, what she's arguing is that the extraction of data by platforms, not just work platforms, but advertising platforms, platforms of all sorts, the capacity to extract data has grown so prodigious that it's not only prediction or custom personalizing of wages, but it's also the use of advertising and the use of nudging like apparatuses that really begin to increasingly administrate our lives to govern us from above in ways that do not augur well. So I think that it's kind of been an influential book. It's a strange book because she doesn't refer to much of the other social science literature on all of these questions. But it does seem to me that the simple answer to the very difficult question that you've posed about meaningful work is that the digitized economy, when in the hands of a very powerful set of wealth-seeking agents, places meaningful work further from the grasp of the workforce than was the case just a few decades ago. That's my sense. Now, I'm going to leave some time for you to probe into whatever I've said, but I can elaborate on these things as to why I think that.
I think all of that is incredibly amazing and so on point and really useful also for what we're doing. I really appreciated that you emphasize this data extraction. That seems to be something that's reoccurring as you're talking about these different questions. And we're still kind of early in our research phase, so that would also really help to kind of guide some of that research because I think that's a really important point that data extraction has become so prevalent. I mean, I'm from Denmark, so like I'm under the whole GDPR legal framework, which has really helped in terms of rejecting cookies. That's at least the what we feel from that.
Yeah.
Makes it a lot easier. So I'm curious, what do you think of I don't know if you have a lot of knowledge about these different frameworks or what like the more political aspect of this. Do you think the governments are responsible for regulating this and how is that something you see happening here in the United States?
Um, yeah. Well, no, I don't see that happening in the United States. If you're really interested in these questions, you as a Danish citizen, um, I think the European perspective on this is a very, very revealing one. Let me refer you to a very interesting, important book
Okay.
that's written by a Dutch scholar named Maria Schatka. It's called The Tech Coup, COUP. And it develops a global perspective on the regulatory challenge to technology. Um, it's so let me just say that Shatka is she's the founding director of a think tank at Stanford University on efforts to regulate the platform economy.
Mm.
So what what she basically argues, I'm going to rely on her, but many other people have made this point as well, is that um, the platform economy has scaled up so rapidly and it's accumulated so much money from venture capital and from institutional investors that it really has become a newly ascendant wing or fraction of the dominant class. It's so powerful now that I mean, you saw this at the inauguration of the second Trump administration. Um, the billionaires are all sitting immediately behind him. And they had provided all kinds of help to him to usher him into office. And he's responding by withdrawing any regulatory apparatus around crypto, by ensuring that there is no state level regulation of AI. Um, so he's giving them everything that they want. And it's really not only dangerous, but it's also anti-democratic. So I think that the U.S. is really incapable right now of regulating the platform firms um, because of the enormous power that the companies have accumulated. Um, but it's not just the U.S. You also see, I mean, you referred to the European efforts to regulate. Um, these are largely American companies, and they've become so much of the infrastructure on which we all rely that everyday life is impossible without these platforms. It's become so obvious to the European Union that they're completely dependent upon these technologies that it becomes a matter of national security to them because they no longer have their sovereignty is eroded by their dependence. You even see this with the International Criminal Court has had a scandal envelop one of their judges, and I think that there's been a sanctioning of one of the judges by international law or some kind of personal sort of accusation. So Microsoft responded by um, uh, terminating the Outlook account of the judge, and he was the chief judge. So therefore, the possibility, the operation of the International Criminal Court came to a halt because none of their data were accessible any longer. So it begins to become just an everyday symbol of the utter vulnerability and powerlessness of much of the European Union infrastructure. So now, I mean, there are efforts on the part of the EU to develop their own digital sovereignty, but they're playing catch up. They're 30 years behind. So it's not just the US, but what's happened is that because of international challenges to national security, the large firms, the platform firms, have used national security as a kind of ideological apparatus, a kind of a shield against regulation, because national security requires that we have really powerful AI, and there's an AI arms race, and we can't let China possibly win. Plus, Palantir, companies like Palantir need to integrate data from IRS and DHS and all the different governmental apparatuses to prevent a terrorist attack. So what we're really doing is we're inventing a kind of a more Western version of the Chinese social credit system. That means that we're all subjected to this kind of apparatus of control in very, very worrisome ways. So I really think that there's going to be a lot of struggle at the state level to try and regulate. But what we're really looking at is a kind of, I mean, I've used the term I mean, people used to speak about pre-industrial and industrial society or post-industrial society. I think that we're now in an era where we have to speak about pre-algorithmic and algorithmic society because we're really entering into an entirely different institutional infrastructure, and we're just really not prepared at all for it. And it's really quite frightening. And you see that in the ways that war is conducted. You see it in the way that facial recognition is used to scan the faces of activists. It's really a very frightening world that we're entering into. We're really not prepared for it. But I think that there's a lot of distrust of the high tech companies. You see that with the pushback against data centers that are beginning to crop up all around. And I think the possibility is there, but from a mass kind of a public opinion standpoint, but whether or not people can really mobilize an effort to regulate the companies is just quite another question.
Yeah, it
So,
is it is quite scary to think about. And I don't know, I started college right before ChatGPT hit, so I had some time here without, and just seeing the changes that have happened in such a short time is just frightening and incredible at the same time. So I feel like that was some really good content you just shared with me. And it kind of leads me a little bit into one more question that I want to make sure that I cover with you. And that is, what kind of reskilling do people need to undertake to maintain agency in this new economy? If you have an answer
well,
to
it's
that.
so I'm now professor emeritus at Northeastern University, and our president Joseph Aoun wrote a book, something about the robot-proof economy, and basically it was a part of the wave of people that were suggesting that learn to code, and now what we're seeing is that AI can code better than you could ever learn. So people are really uncertain. What sorts of reskilling is going to be necessary? I think it's going to be important for people to learn how to to evaluate algorithms collectively. In other words, we're going to need to see how apps can, I mean, just at a kind of popular way, there are efforts to control or respond to or gather information about apps. So if people can, I mean, this is not an official skills policy, but what you're seeing is that many um, grassroots groups are beginning to try and write algorithms, so, at a means of self-defense. People can, day laborers can avoid employers that engage in wage theft, for example, or people working on Amazon and Mechanical Turk can evaluate employers or use a program that was written called Turk Opticon that informs people as to the really good jobs so they can look for them first. But that's a good example of how people are scampering around to compete against one another still. So I'm not sure that skills investment in skills is really going to be the answer when virtually any skill can be, even therapists now, therapeutic care work can be automated. Kindergartens are being taught by robots increasingly. So I have a friend who, Allison Pugh, who wrote a book called, I think it was The Last Human Job. And it was about how connective, care work or teaching can't really be automated. A bot can't really kind of look you in the eye and say, "Yeah, I see you're smiling, and I understand why." But I think she was wrong because now what we're beginning to see is that people are investing in AI and in Chat GPT and forming what they feel to be meaningful relationships with these technologies. So I think that it's not a question of reskilling. Uh, what it might be is a question of setting organizational policies, whether the use of HR like regulations or tax policies that provide incentives for firms to use AI in ways that augment the skills of employees rather than displacing their skills. So I think there is a possibility there. My daughter is a lawyer and she works in social insurance, like social security policies, sorts of things. And when AI started to really break out on the horizon, her fear was that what was going to happen is that, for example, when people apply for disability, like they can no longer work and need some modest support, um, rather than using the AI in order to quickly evaluate and qualify them, if in fact they are qualified, that AI would be used to accelerate the denial of claims. And that's also being used by insurance. So there are different policies that can be embedded in the algorithms. And it seems to me that rather than looking at the supply side of work, how can we ensure that workers are skilled, we need to look at the demand side. And the question is, how can we ensure that employers and employing organizations utilize the technology in ways that really further the interests of humanity? Like, is that asking too much?
Do you think that would actually happen based on how
I
things are
think,
going now?
well, the way that things are going are entirely one-sided, but I think that, there are moments where openings happen and, dominant groups are set back on their heels and scandals happen. Like you're beginning to see that now, like with um, YouTube and Facebook have suffered major legal defeats recently. And it's a little bit like, no one thought that big tobacco could be brought to heel. And they were, I mean, that's not true globally because tobacco companies still sell their poisons globally. But I think it is possible. It's just it might seem impossible at any given moment, but there are legal and other kind of like political mobilizations that can happen and make a real difference. I think there's a lot of suspicion about big tech, and if that can be mobilized, then I think it is possible to shape the employment policies and practices of large platform companies.
Yeah, that's a nice encouraging view on it. I hope it'll come true. Because you're right, we've been talking a lot about those cases with the lawsuits that have had some good successes right now. And it's funny because my professor made the exact same comparison as you did between the
Mm.
tobacco industry and what's going on right now. And she's saying that we might in the future remember this moment as the time like the tobacco change happened. We don't know yet because it's based on like appeals and all that kind of thing, but this might be the moment that we start seeing some of that important change. So that's really exciting. And I guess lastly, like, is there anything I haven't asked you about that you think is important to share? And it's okay if there's not anything.
Well, give me a second.
Sure,
Um,
absolutely.
Well, I think one thing I want to say is that we need to think in nuanced ways about differences among the digitized economy. Um, so you see in the paper that Julie Shore and I wrote, there was a chart that showed 5 different occupations that are involved in the um, the development and growth of the platform economy. And even within any one of those boxes that we developed, there is a highly nuanced set of different experiences that workers take away. Some people do develop a sense of gratification and a feeling that they are their own bosses. Those tend to be people that are using the platform economy as a second job or a way of kind of funding their vacations. And they're in a very different situation than people that are entirely different, dependent upon the platform economy. So, because of the inter-platform differences and intra-platform differences, those are all sources of differentiation of the workforce. And we haven't even gotten into like people that are like, I mean, like influencers are very different from Uber drivers, right? So, in some way, there has to be one of the part of the challenges is to kind of extract from these many differences, the shared interests that people have in a humane workforce, and and that's the challenge for people like you, Nina, and that is to further policies that encourage employment organizations of various sorts to adopt policies that augment rather than dissolve the human potential. So that's what I think.
Amazing. Yeah. Hope our professor's very hopeful that we're all going to be change makers within this field. That's why she's
Well,
doing the course to begin with.
well,
Uh,
good, excellent. So good luck to you. Stay in touch if you want.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. You've said some really, I'm just going to stop the recording.